So we're going to dive right in. Caroline, I'm really excited to have you and to be able to have this conversation with you, speaking to your founder journey and where you currently are at, the CEO and co-founder of OrganiCare.
Thank you, Destinee. I'm so excited to be here. I love that you're doing this.
Well, why don't we start? I mean, you and I have known each other for a while now. And, kind of what I was starting to say before we started recording is that these conversations are great time for us to kind of hear about things that we don't typically hear about. And so I thought it would be interesting to start with the origin and the birthing of OrganiCare. You've been a multiple time founder. I find it so impressive with your achievements. But maybe we can start talking about how you came to the origin and the birthing of OrganiCare, and then we can kind of peel back a little bit more on your founder's journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So back in 2016, I guess, is when we first started talking about it. And I have two co-founders. One of them is an Italian from Italy that actually brought the tech that we use in a lot of our products. And the other one is a fellow kind of entrepreneur here in Austin who has been in the medical device industry for a long time. And so the idea initially was actually to bring this technology from Italy, where they're much more kind of embracing and consuming of natural and organic products in Europe, and bring that over to the first aid market. We actually started out in first aid. And so we thought the consumer market in the US would be perfect for this. So we decided to start the company, founded it, and the first product was a Curoxin brand first aid ointment, which we still make. But then a couple of years later, our Italian partner continued to do kind of research and development, has a lot of medical connections, and discovered that it was effective. The same technology was effective for feminine yeast infection. And so once we discovered that, then we expanded with the FemiClear brand, which was kind of born in 2019. And we started developing feminine health products. And so, about a year into that, we realized we need to pick a lane. And so, given the size of our company at the time and the wherewithal that we had, we decided let's focus on FemiClear. We think there's a lot of potential. It's an underserved market for sure. Just not enough attention is being given to women's health issues. And there was broad applicability for the technology to not just yeast infection, but as we later figured out, bacterial vaginosis, urinary tract infection, genital herpes, all of these different conditions were amenable to the technology that we have.
It's interesting that you mentioned that women's health is an underserved market. And this was back in 2019. So in some ways, you were ahead of the curve in terms of seeing the potential of women's health, both products and care, right? I mean, the last 4 years alone, we've seen women's health, menopause, like really having its moment in ways that we just haven't seen before. And so I'm curious as to what the conviction was behind it. Was it pure market research? Was it gut instinct that really led you to pick that lane and have conviction in following through on that?
No, I think that, we knew that these were underserved conditions because there had just been no innovation in years, decades even. And in some cases, only a prescription was available, same prescription that had been available for decades, nothing over the counter for like BV, nothing over the counter for herpes. And so women were just kind of using the same old things that really only worked, maybe 60% of the time. So, you have a lot of unhappy consumers, a lot of unhappy people trying to manage these conditions on their own. Even the doctors were frustrated. I talked to probably 60, 70 different OBGYNs who say, they have patients that are coming in over and over and over again for BV. BV is probably one of the worst to be handled by metronidazole, which is the prescription that is the kind of standard of care line of treatment. And so, I think we knew that this was going to be an area that needs development, that could be developed. And I think we got lucky with the momentum that menopause, the conversation conversations around menopause becoming more and more public. People like Halle Berry in the news, and really got kind of going on a junket talking about, the importance of addressing these symptoms that women have been silently suffering with for so long. And so, I think it was one of those right time, right place situations where we were, we picked a good horse and had the right technology and the right type of product.
I certainly have my thoughts in terms of, when you're innovating and being first in the market and first in category, on one hand, that's exciting. But on the other hand, there's a lot of consumer education that needs to be in play. And I think that you continue to see that now, or at least, with the channels that we've seen. So I'm curious as to, for you, what has that been like in terms of being first in the market, being such an innovator and a disruptor? Because we've seen pros and cons to that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure, there are pros and cons. I will give credit to our retail buyers. So, kind of Walgreens, CVS, Walmart, we've got some really great retail partners that saw it early on. And, kind of they had been like given direction from above. We're looking for efficacious. We're looking for natural. This is what the consumers want. And we happen to deliver. So we were able to get broad distribution pretty quickly, pretty early, without having proven anything necessarily in the market. So a little bit different than most CPG companies have to do. They need to go prove themselves online, usually before they even have a right to have a meeting with a retail buyer. Because of the nature of the product and the claims that we were able to make, we were able to get in early on. But the con with that is you don't have any brand awareness. Oh no. So, on shelf, nobody's seen you before. Oftentimes we were on shelf initially with a single SKU, which is really hard. You've got one little product on shelf and that's hard to get noticed. It's hard to look credible when there's no brand awareness. So yeah, it was great that we got distribution early and the retail buyers got it, but now it was time to educate the consumer and spread awareness. And that's a challenge. It's a really busy world and lots of messages coming at people. So, firsthand what it's like to try to break through the noise and get heard. So I would say that's the downfall of being first is you're educating people for the first time.
Exactly. Both on the solution and the brand, right? And I'm curious as to, especially in the beginning, to get attention with one SKU on shelf as a brand that's breaking out. What would you say were your top 2 to 3 wins that really has built the company and even built the foundation to get it to where it's at today?
I think having the herpes product, which we launched in late 2020, was one of the first early wins. There's nothing like it on the shelf. There was only kind of the antiviral, and the way herpes is diagnosed and then treated, because it's a chronic illness. Once you get it, you have it for life. People go to the doctor, they get their diagnosis, which is a tough diagnosis to get because there's so much emotional impact that has. But then they just kind of renew their prescription, and they're not really looking for anything else because they know there's nothing out there. So they're not necessarily looking, because it was, quote, white space for retail and over-the-counter options. It's kind of slowly started to get traction. And so I think that was our first win, a really effective solution for managing outbreaks, making them go away faster, in some cases, preventing them from actually erupting at all. And then I think our second biggest win was with bacterial vaginosis treatment, the product there, which is our biggest hero product today. And I think at that one, we were getting to be a more mature company by that point, and we did the launch in a better, more effective way, and we're able to kind of put more marketing muscle behind that was effective marketing muscle. In the early days, I will say, it was hard to know what was going to work. And so we tried a lot of different things, and, you can spend a lot of money and have not very much impact, and you can spend a small amount of money and have big impact. And so, with marketing, as you're always looking for, how do we get the biggest bang for our buck? And so I think we did a pretty good job launching, and it just started growing. And because it was the only thing like it, and it is such a prevalent condition. I mean, women, a third of women get it, and over half of those get it over and over and over again. And it's a pretty miserable feeling to have it. It sidelines you kind of from life and from intimacy for sure. So again, a lot of motivation to find something that really works. And our product really works.
Well, maybe this would be a good segment to go into bragging rights, right? Touching value prop or like unique products. And also, talking about your core customer, because, you may have different customer segments. And I'm curious as to who is your core customer and that they're even looking for an alternative solution. Like, who is your customer that's even thinking about looking and even doing research around this and then being open to a natural solution that they would then have to believe it's more effective?
I mean, I think that most people are pretty open-minded, particularly when they don't have a solution that's working well for them now. So, in our case, with most of these conditions, even yeast infection, because the typical miconazole or azole type drugs that are both prescription or non-prescription, over the counter, those have become less effective because they've been around forever. And there is that resistance problem that, over time are just not going to be cured by the old drugs. So they're looking for something new and different. And we've done tons of consumer research. Women absolutely prefer natural if it's also effective. So they're looking for natural if it can also be effective, particularly when you're kind of trying to cure an infection. Wow. So we've tried hard and thought about personas and how do we segment our market. And it really is like women that, obviously have these conditions. We do have preventative care products as well. And so it's women that care about staying healthy down there. They want their vaginal health to be a priority. Yeah. So finding those people, there's not really a demographic or these aren't people who love cooking. I mean, this could be anybody, right? Anybody and everybody. It crosses all sorts of demographic. We're looking for those folks that, where, kind of one of these condition headlines will capture their attention.
That makes sense. So in terms of, maybe we can kind of pivot to your founder's journey. I'm curious, having been a multiple time founder, is it easier this time around or not so much? And when did you know that you were meant and that your path is to be an entrepreneur?
It's funny. I didn't know until, I kind of finished undergrad. I worked for a couple of years at a big company. Then I went to business school and I discovered entrepreneurship really in business school. Now, my mother was an entrepreneur and my father kind of did medical research in a very entrepreneurial way. So I kind of grew up with it, but I didn't really necessarily identify as that's my path too, until I actually pursued an entrepreneurial kind of concentration in business school at Rice. And when I got out, I actually executed on a business plan that I wrote when I was in business school. And that was my first company. It was a DNA identification company. So, and then it just sort of fit and I've never looked back. I mean, I really can't imagine. I did not enjoy my time at the big company. I won't name what it was, but that's just not for me. It's for some people and I applaud that. And particularly the kind of entrepreneurship and the kind of companies that I've founded or led are disruptive. I like doing something new in a truly underserved, unmet need market. And I happen to like kind of science-based products or services and trying to explain those to the average consumer. That's sort of where I feel most comfortable. And what has been kind of a recurring theme in most of my endeavors. So I think, I knew back then and I've never looked back. A lot of people that are entrepreneurs like started their company and they run it for 20, 30 years and they just get better and better and better. And in a way, I really envy them because that, you're just honing your skill set, your market, your consumer, that's great. When you kind of jump to new markets, to new things, to new company structures, like in my first two businesses, I didn't raise money. In the third third company, I didn't found that company. I actually was hired in after being an investor in that company. And so this one, I had investors, we raised money. That was new for me. So in some ways, like running the business and certain things that you learn over time by running a business, from staffing to organization to how do you structure your kind of planning and your meeting cadence and all that sort of stuff. All that is cumulative knowledge that grows over time. And so now you can recognize a problem. Oh, I've seen that before. I know what to do here. But a new problem, no, I'm just like a kid in kindergarten and need to figure it out. So yes, in some ways it definitely gets easier, but when you're tackling new things and new problems at the beginning of your education.
Yeah, no, I can get that. You also bring up an interesting point in terms of fundraising. And yes, you have co-founders, but fundraising as a female founder. And, in the last 10 years, we've seen VC and capital shift, or certain ones having specific focuses on female founders. That wasn't even always the case. And so again, I would say you are innovative and really charting that path. And so curious as to how initial fundraising or fundraisers was for you, especially with selling a women's health, women's care product that some men may not be comfortable talking about.
I think that, our investors, to give them credit. So, well, initially we were raising money on the Curoxin brand. And so there was interest and excitement around that. When we, kind of raised another round and we were talking about FemiClear and the feminine health space, I think a lot of people by that point knew this was coming and that this was a good area to get into, a good category to get into. And I think, again, we have a really compelling product with compelling messages and lots of, kind of really big markets to go tackle and the wherewithal to do it. So I do feel fortunate. I know so many women-led companies don't get any funding or get very little. And so we were lucky. We were oversubscribed in our rounds, and that felt good, I have to say. But that's a whole different element to business that was new for me. So I was getting up a steep learning curve when we were doing that.
And how much of that would you say was also due to you having built up your investor network over time? Like, of course, not undermining the business plan and the value prop, and curious as to how your network and having been an investor also came into play and being oversubscribed.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think I knew any of our investors, really, or maybe a few. I mean, because again, we did not get institutional money. We just got, funding from angels or high net worth individuals or family offices. So most of the significant investment I did not know. We had a couple of leads that helped us, kind of and spread the word. So if you get, a champion that's willing to, kind of talk you up and share the opportunity with people they know, that helps a lot. And so for sure that helped make that happen.
That's always a question for, a question in my mind as well, like how much of the network, and I get it's not a straight path. In terms of retail channels versus D2C, and we've certainly talked about focuses and priorities with the team, especially when it comes to paid media investment. I think it'd be interesting to kind of dive into the thought process or how this has unfolded, right? Because you did get in-store retail placement pretty early on with significant traction. And so what has your learnings been around that and also business focus?
Yeah. So I think a few years ago, a D2C business was common, perfectly acceptable, for consumer products. But now I think if you're looking at your marketability in the future and the kind of consumer products companies that bigger companies want to acquire at some point, we learned that omnichannel was absolutely essential. So we had to figure out how to sell online, but obviously also had to sell in retail. And so the cadence of sales in retail is very limited. It's a long sales cycle. You have one opportunity per year to get in. And so it's really important that you plan for that really well, and that once you get in, you need to stay in. And that's the hard part. The getting in is actually, I think, a little bit easier. The staying in is what's really hard, because they look at how fast are your products turning, what's the velocity of your sales off the shelf. And so that's the main number one metric we care about, is what is our sales velocity at each retailer by SKU. And we have to pay attention to that the most closely. So, most of our efforts are around preserving and improving that metric, because with D2C, or even with Amazon, we're not going to get deleted. We're not going to, get kicked off the digital shelf, because it's easy to have an infinite number of items on the digital shelf. But you want to preserve the hard-won distribution gains that you get by making sure your product is successful in every retailer you go in.
And this is something that we've also been talking about in terms of, using digital media to drive, store velocity, and have been running, a mix of experiments. Is there, I guess, what's on the table for 2026 in terms of growth priorities, new products that's on the horizon?
Yeah. So I always like to say there's three ways that we think about growing revenue. More distribution, getting more doors, for your products. Number two, new product innovation. And number three is improving the sales velocity. And so new innovation, that's always exciting for us. I think it's one of our core competencies. And we do have a couple of new products coming out, in the new year in 2026, plus a lot. We always have a pretty robust roadmap of products that we want to develop. And, we're just trying to not bring out too many at once, and sort of, kind of have a finite number of products per year that we launch. But we're really excited about them. One of them is one that will be much more broadly accessible to women, meaning more women will be able to use this and not have to have it's kind of an evergreen prevention kind of product. So we're super excited about that. We try to listen to the consumer and find out what is it they need. And we also listen to our retail buyers. What are they looking for? And we have really smart retail buyers that have really clear ideas of what do they think the market needs, and what are they looking at, and what do they see that we might not see, where, consumers are giving them tea leaves to read, and they can figure out, kind of what they think, where the next big thing is. So we try to put all that into our innovation planning process. But velocities, like I mentioned before, is the number one thing we care about. And so many things go into that. It isn't just about marketing spend, although that's a huge driver of it. And you're always looking to find what impacts, your velocities on shelf the most. But there's also things that you can do with your retailer, like how well are you partnering with your retailer, and do you have optimal shelf position, and are your products brand blocked so they get more, noticed, or are they, optimized for what the type of product is the consumer going to find it? With feminine health, we're covering a lot of different things in a pretty small space. There's only so much space on shelf. And so is your product easy to find? Is it well labeled? How good is your package design? Does it convey what it needs to convey to the consumer? So there's just lots and lots of different things that feed into that velocity number. And so we're always looking at all of those things.
Why are your products that effective, in your opinion, and why are they so standout?
I'll give a quick little science lesson on the tech behind our products. So one of the key ingredients in our topical products, and when I say topical, it's anything that goes on the skin or intravaginally. What happens is we start with a very high grade, ultra virgin olive oil that's got certain specifications, and we oxygenate it. We kind of pump oxygen into it through a certain manufacturing process that takes a while. And during that process, the oxygen binds with the fatty acids in the oil, and it makes a natural peroxide. Well, everybody knows that hydrogen peroxide is what you pour on a wound, or, it kills microbes. It kills bacteria, kills things so that it doesn't get infected. When you have peroxide bonds in something that becomes an ointment, because the oil becomes an ointment in our manufacturing process, then, that peroxide bond kind of stays where it is. It doesn't evaporate like hydrogen peroxide does. It will stay, kind of in the vaginal walls, or it will stay on the skin. And it works to eliminate bacteria, fungus, or yeast. And also it eliminates virus. It does eliminate HSV1 and HSV2, which cause the herpes outbreaks. Wow. So we know through both lab testing and then in clinical studies, we get women, who have these conditions to use our products and report back what was their experience. And what we find, very different than kind of the products that have been on the market, that over 90% of women, all symptoms are eliminated. So we feel really good that we have both the clinical data, lab data, and evidence to support that these products really work. And, it's kind of, and that ingredient, the oxygenated olive oil that I'm talking about, it's patented process. It's patented for the application that we're using it for. So that's what makes it special. I think a lot of natural products have nice ingredients, but I don't know that there's clinical studies or lab studies done on those. And that's one of the things that separates us, I think, from the rest.
Well, maybe to wrap this up, since we already talked about what's next, I think it'd be helpful to, you shared about how you became an entrepreneur and this is your path and you never looked back. I'm curious if you're aware or know of any childhood influences that has led you to kind of where you are today, whether it's family environment, teachings, both, and you mentioned this briefly, but like, for example, both my parents are entrepreneurs, and truly I didn't know any other path, even though I was at companies for a long time. And so I'm curious if there are any memorable moments or high impact moments in your childhood that you recall that possibly just led your entire trajectory or impacted that.
Well, for sure, I think I mentioned my dad was an MD genetic researcher, and that was some of his work is what, caused me to create that first company. But my mother started a company when I was a sophomore in high school. She had just been an English teacher before that. Okay. And she kind of, my father was the medical director of that company, but she ran it. I mean, he was doing his thing and she really ran the company. So I got to see firsthand, my mother going from kind of mostly, housewife to entrepreneur when I was, in high school. And so that was, I'm sure, an impactful thing at the time, even though maybe I wasn't that conscious of it. It was clearly like a big change in our daily life. And she was off doing this great thing, which ended up being really successful. But I think, my father sadly died almost 4 years ago, but at his memorial, which was a tremendous event, I learned so much more about probably things that had seeped in over time from both my parents. I would give both my parents credit that, that when, these other people that worked with my dad and talked about how he would approach research, and a lot of great stuff came out of Baylor College of Medicine, where he was for a long time. He later went to Merck and led their genome research center. But, he just approached things in a very entrepreneurial way. It was in science and in academic science at that, but it was a very entrepreneurial approach to how do we solve this problem? How do we come up with, novel ways of thinking about it? And I think that just kind of seeped in over time. And I'm really grateful that I had both of them as role models. It was, a lucky thing for me.
Okay. So this triggered one last question. Being a founder, and it's interesting because I think that being a founder, regardless of background or experience or history, you're taking risk and you're taking unknown risk, and you're willing to work hard and grind for a high degree of unknowns. And so, I'm curious for you, in terms of financial risk or just personal risk of like wasting time, has that ever occurred to you? Because, just from talking with founders, like it's it's just something that's always been interesting to me, right? Because you are leaping into the unknown and you have to have enough trust and faith. And many times you're not going to make that work. And so I'm curious what that internal experience was for you, or maybe it just didn't even come up and this was what there was to do.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I do think it is resilience is the thing that you have to have, and an unrealistic optimism. Yeah, really, you have to just know that you're going to figure it out. And if you hit a wall and you hit a wall and you hit a wall, you can't feel defeated. You have to just keep at it, trying something new. And I think that's, I don't know how much that's taught. Or if it's just kind of how your personality or character is made up. But yeah, no, it's always just okay, well, that didn't work, so let's try something else, and not having, not falling into a depression over that. Because sometimes, bad things happen and bad luck happens. Good luck also happens. And most super successful people had a great dose of good luck along the way. And sometimes people where it doesn't work out, they had a big dose of bad luck. But having that resilience to try to get through to the next step is I think, a really important component of your, kind of how you're wired.
I get that. And I do wonder if it's instinct, if it's cultivated in the background or like nurtured internally. But yeah, no, that's a well said. Well, thank you. This has been really good to be able to do this with you.
Thank you, Destinee. This is awesome. It's so fun to see you on the other side. And I love the rest of our relationship and getting to know you. So this is super fun to have a conversation like this.